My name is André Leu and I am the President of the International Federation of Organic Agricultural Movements, and we are the global umbrella body for the whole organic sector. And my particular role as President is really like the roaming or global ambassador. I go to events around the world. I speak about organic agriculture, about IFOAM. I also have meetings with various organisations, like people within the UN, with different industry groups, with governments, with ministers, about various aspects of organic agriculture.
And how did you come to, with your busy schedule, how did you decide that you needed to write a book about the myth of safe pesticides?
Well, it's something that's actually been on my mind for a very long time. I come from a farming family, and I was the one who would always get very ill as a child, from pesticides. So I was always going to be an organic farmer. But over the years I've noticed a lot of illness in farming communities, particularly cancers, degenerative nerve diseases, children's behavioural problems like ADHD and other problems which are actually growing rapidly, and you start to ask questions. So I started researching it, and I suppose I started to write the first papers on it about 10 years ago, but really it's the last 2 years that I turned it into a book, because we're getting a lot of regulatory people saying there's no reason to eat organic food because there's nothing wrong with the pesticide levels in the food that we have at the moment. And I felt that really needed to be answered, so I started looking at the science, what the world's best experts and scientists were saying over it and about it. And to my surprise, I learned that the regulatory authorities are actually ignoring a large body of scientific research and making their decisions essentially on data-free assumptions, when they should be using the best science to make their decisions. And when you start looking at the scientific papers and the experts they are ignoring, it gets very concerning. There's organisations like the United States President's Cancer Panel and their recommendations, and they show how about 80% of cancers come from environmental exposures, particularly chemicals and pesticides. This is being ignored. The World Health Organization, the United Nations Environmental Program, put out a very good meta-study on how chemicals, and particularly pesticides, are endocrine disruptors. And this is very important for children and for the unborn, because as an endocrine disruptor, they're disrupting the hormone system and disrupting the way hormones signal events when children start growing limbs, nervous systems, their brains, and this leads to a whole range of behavioural and other problems that last their whole life. And we know that when these chemicals work as endocrine disruptors, they can work in parts per trillion, which is the equivalent of one drop in 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools. And the standard testing can look at that at parts per million or bigger amounts, and it seems reasonably safe. But when we take it down to these very small amounts and they start acting like hormones, we're finding that they're very unsafe. And we need to make sure that every single pesticide and residue is actually tested at these small levels. At the moment, they are just using extrapolations and data-free assumptions as saying they're safe. They have no evidence-based science to say that it is safe. Look, and unfortunately I think that's putting it very clearly. There is disinformation, or how can you say, the spin of information that is trumping the evidence, or in many cases trying to say that the evidence is wrong or it's not relevant. And the example is if you get studies of some chemicals that show that you have birth defects, for instance, at very small amounts, and what the companies will do, they'll do a similar experiment, not the same one, they won't replicate the same one like you're supposed to. They do one with similar guidelines and say we cannot find that result. Therefore, because we cannot find it, that shows that the first one is faulty. But this is very wrong, because they haven't replicated the first one. If you do another experiment with different guidelines, you expect to get a different result. And I suppose the best way to put it is we've seen it all the time with big tobacco, with asbestos and other people. For years, asbestos was used everywhere because technically it's not a poison. You can eat it by the bucket load and you won't get sick. But you breathe one speck in your lungs and you can end up with 3 diseases, never pronounce it properly, mesothelioma, asbestosis and lung cancer. Every one of them is fatal. Now we've gone from a situation where there was no worries with asbestos. Now if you want to remove asbestos out of your house, you've got to spend thousands of dollars and put it in toxic landfills. It's a very hazardous substance. But they knew as early as the 1920s and 30s that this was dangerous, and they just kept on putting in disinformation. Is why it's used everywhere, in houses and schools, school playgrounds and hair dryers. Everybody got exposed to it, and now we're sitting on a time bomb because of it. Look, one of the things I go as an example of that in my book, I use the most popular herbicide or weedicide actually in the world. It's here in the States, but all around the world, and it's used because everybody thinks it is so safe. We use it in children's playgrounds, along sidewalks. When people are walking and shopping, you'll see people out spraying. Kids are playing in the playground and they're spraying because this is safe. It's a bit like DDT was in the 1940s. You can see people sitting on beaches in New Jersey and they're out spraying DDT over them because it's so safe. But now we have a huge body of good scientific studies showing that this is not safe, and not safe at any level as far as we can see. And I actually use glyphosate, which is the active ingredient of this product, as an example, showing the many studies linking it to birth defects, and there's a lot of that, linking it to cancers and precancerous conditions. We have good studies on that, linking it to what we call oxidative stress, which is where the oxides, peroxides actually damage different tissues, and there's lots of them in the body. And usually what happens, you need antioxidants to break these down, but this product actually creates a lot of very strong free radicals in the body that damages a whole range of tissues and by oxidizing them. And that causes, as well as premature aging, it can cause a whole range of other diseases. The other thing that we know now, it actually interferes with one of the major enzyme systems in the body. It's responsible for 80% of detoxifying toxins in your body, and also for a lot to do with hormone production and other important parts of the body's metabolism, so that we have what's called homeostasis, where everything is working in the normal checks and balances. And Roundup has been shown to interfere with hundreds of these particular important enzymes. The bulk of the money that goes into agricultural research goes into using chemicals and now GMOs. And we're talking about billions and billions of dollars every year, of which, you know, less than a fraction of a percent goes to organic and agroecological methods. What we need to do is also see a shift in that research funding away from chemical-based agriculture to good ecological-based agriculture. Because now that we're starting to get that research, we are getting equal to higher yields than chemical-based agriculture. What we're in effect proposing is you go from a toxic synthetic input-based agriculture to one that is about knowledge-based, knowledge management, where we train farmers, and most of these services, crop protection services that they get from synthetic chemicals now can be done through proper ecosystem services. By designing proper ecological systems within the farm, you can do it. And that for farmers means that once they've got these systems up, they don't have to pay any money. That's going to make their farm so much more profitable, because they're not paying out all these bills for fertilizers and for insecticides. So they've got a lower cost structure, and plus now we're showing they can get higher yields. This is a real win-win.